In 1904, a white man made a major mistake. He stepped off the train in the Mississippi Delta and started causing a scene, a ruckus, shoving, acting like he owned the place. In any other town in the South, if a black man touched him, it was a death sentence. The rules were very simple. White man could do no wrong, and a black man had no power. But this wasn't any other town. It was Mound Bayou. The marshal stepped out in front of the crowd, and he was a black man wearing a press uniform and a badge on his chest that gave him the full power of the state. He didn't look down. He didn't ask for permission. He walked right over to the man and put his hand on his shoulder and told him that he was under arrest. Imagine the confusion on his face. He was looking around for a white officer to save him. He was looking for a white judge to dismiss his charges. But he realized a terrifying truth. None of that was coming. The mayor was black, the judge was black, and the cops were black. For the first time in his life, the color of his skin was not a get out of jail free card. And this is the story of Mound Bayou. This is One Mic Black History. I'm your host, Country Boy. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories at onemichistory.com. But without further ado, let's get started. This wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a movie. This was a real place, a black fortress in the middle of one of the most racist states in America, a place where Jim Crow had absolutely no jurisdiction. People love to talk about towns that were burned, and you know some of the names: Tulsa, Rosewood, Wilmington, North Carolina. We share the pictures of the smoke and the ruins because it fits the story that we've been taught that everything we've ever built, they destroyed it. But that doesn't tell the complete story. There was a town that they couldn't burn, a town that stood for nearly a century as a living, breathing proof that black people did not need integration to survive. All they needed was infrastructure. This is the story of Mound Bayou, Mississippi. And if you ever wondered what it looked like when a community stops asking for permission, this is your blueprint. So, to understand how a place like this could even exist, you have to go back to a bit of a paradox. You have to go back to a plantation called Davis Bend. Decades before the Civil War, there was a plantation owned by Joseph Davis, the older brother of Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. But Joseph Davis was different. He was a utopian socialist. He believed that if you gave enslaved people enough autonomy, they could produce more. So he set up a system that looked less like a labor camp and more like a twisted experiment on self-governance. Enslaved people had their own court system with their own judges and juries to settle disputes. They were trained to be managers. They learned how to keep complex ledgers, how to negotiate contracts with steamboat captains, and how to run a massive agricultural enterprise. Growing up in this system was a young man by the name of Isaiah T. Montgomery. He was more than just a laborer. He was a secretary. He was in the room where deals were being made. He saw the paperwork, and he learned the hidden language of capitalism. When the Civil War ended, Isaiah looked around at the chaos of Reconstruction and saw the violence rising. He saw the Ku Klux Klan forming, and he realized something profound. Integration was a trap. As long as black people lived under white jurisdiction, they would never truly be free. He didn't want to fight for a seat at the table. He was trying to build his own damn house. He knew that he couldn't just take the land. He had to make a deal with the system. So in 1887, he found a surveyor's map and pointed to a spot in the Yazoo Delta, a place that no one wanted. It was about 840 acres of nightmare. It was thick with timber, swamp water, and black bears. The mosquitoes were so thick that if you waved your hand, you'd catch a fistful. The Louisville, New Orleans, and Texas Railroad owned the land, but they couldn't do anything with it because no white settlers were desperate enough to clear it. So Isaiah Montgomery put on his suit and went to the railroad executives and made them a business proposition. He said, "You have a railroad going through a useless swamp. Sell it to us. We'll clear the trees, we'll drain the water, we'll plant the cotton, and we'll turn your empty track into a gold mine." The white executives simply saw dollar signs. They thought they were taking advantage of a desperate people. They had no idea they were funding a fortress. Montgomery would purchase the land for $7 an acre. But here's where the genius part came in, and the part that changed history. He set up a charter for the town. The policy included that the land in Mound Bayou could only be sold to other black folks. Think about that. He used the exact same restrictive covenants that white neighborhoods like Levittown used to keep us out, but he flipped that weapon. He used it to keep the oppressors out. This created an invisible wall around his town. If you didn't own the land, you couldn't vote in the town elections. If you couldn't vote, you couldn't be the sheriff. You couldn't be the judge. By controlling the land, you controlled the law. He moved with some urgency. He knew that they were on a race against time. The first settlers crept through in rough shanties, fighting off malaria and wild animals while clearing the trees by hand. But within a decade, the swamp was gone and the place was a bit of a miracle. By 1907, if you walked through the streets of Mound Bayou, you wouldn't have seen the struggle. You would have seen power. There were 13 black-owned stores. You would see 3 cotton gins humming with machinery. You would see a train depot that was busier than some of the white depots in neighboring towns. They even printed a newspaper, The Demonstrator, because if you didn't control the media, someone else would write your story for you. But this isn't just about buildings. The town also closed the loop on economics. In most places, a black farmer would grow his cotton, but he'd have to take it to a white gin to be processed. The white owner would then cheat him on the weight, and then he would take his money to a white bank where they would charge him predatory interest, and he would spend it in a white store that wouldn't even let him try on shoes. Every black dollar went into white hands immediately. But Mound Bayou changed that. The cornerstone of this strategy was the Bank of Mound Bayou, founded in 1904 by Charles Banks. They called him the Wizard of Finance. He understood that freedom wasn't real unless you could fund it. When he opened the bank, it wasn't just a place to store cash. Farmers from all over the Delta, even outside of the town, started to bring their money to Charles Banks because when he walked into the lobby, they were treated like human beings. They could get a loan to buy seed or equipment without signing away their dignity. And that money stayed within the town. The bank lent that money to the grocer hired a carpenter, the carpenter played the doctor, and the dollar circulated 5, 6, 7 times before it left the community. But the greatest test of this infrastructure wasn't just banking, it was survival. During the 1940s, if you were black and you got sick in the Mississippi Delta, you were in trouble. White hospitals would not take you, or you were thrown in the basement ward with no heat and no nurses. You could die from a simple infection because you were on the wrong side of the color line. So Mound Bayou decided to build a healthcare system. They didn't ask the government for a grant. They went to fraternal orders. We often forget groups like the Knights and Daughters of Tabor. These were secret societies, benevolent orders where the members paid small monthly dues, mostly nickels and dimes. It was the original crowdfunding. They pulled together these nickels and dimes into a massive war chest and built the Taborian Hospital in 1942. This place was state-of-the-art for the time. It had x-ray machines, incubators for premature babies, sterile operating theaters that rivaled anything in Memphis or Chicago. They hired black surgeons and paid them top dollar, and they had black nurses in crisp white uniforms. For a sharecropper who spent his whole life being called boy. Walking into a black hospital had to be a life-changing experience. The man running this hospital was Dr. T.R.M. Howard. He knew that you couldn't just have a healthy body in a sick society. You had to fix the politics too. So he turned Mound Bayou into a headquarters for the civil rights movement in the Delta. He launched Regional Council of Negro Leadership. Every year, they would hold massive rallies in a field just outside of town. Sometimes up to 10,000 people would attend. Dr. Howard would get on stage and give them practical instructions on how to use their economic power. And this is where slogans like "Don't buy gas where you can't use the restroom" would come from. This was years before the Montgomery bus boycott, and he was teaching people that their wallet was a weapon. And if a gas station wouldn't let you use the restroom, you could keep your money in your pocket and keep driving. See, when you start messing with the money, the system begins to fight back. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled on Brown versus the Board of Education, and the white power structure in Mississippi panicked. They formed the White Citizens Council. These were bankers, politicians, merchants. They were called the middle class Ku Klux Klan, and they decided to use financial warfare to attempt to crush the movement. They initiated something called a credit freeze. They made a list of every activist, every member in NAACP, every person who dared to speak up. And they called banks and they said to call in your loans. Suddenly, black business owners had 24 hours to pay off debts they thought they had years to pay. Farmers went to buy seed and were told that credit was no good. Sharecroppers were kicked off their land. They tried to starve the movement into submission. And this is where the infrastructure of Mound Bayou saved the day, because Dr. Howard and his lenders didn't have to beg for mercy. They could look at the math, and they organized what they called an anti-freeze fund. They reached out to the Tri-State Bank of Memphis and other black-owned institutions, and they moved massive amount of capital into the Delta. When a white bank called in a loan on a black activist, Dr. Howard could step in and say, "We will take on that debt." They would pay off the white bank and refinance the loan for the black institution. This kept storekeepers stocked, this kept mortgages current, and this kept black trucks moving. But these type of efforts don't make headlines. It wasn't a march, it was a wire transfer. That wire transfer saved the movement. It bought them time, and in a long war, time can be the most expensive commodity. This black fortress protected people in ways that went beyond money. When Emmett Till was murdered just a few miles away, the trial was a dangerous farce. Black reporters and witnesses were threatened with death if they testified. Where did they go? They went to Mound Bayou. Dr. Howard turned his home into a command center. He set up an armed guard. He had a safe house. Mamie Till Mobley, Emmett Till's mother, even stayed there. They would drive them to the courthouse every morning to face that horror, and then drive back to Mound Bayou at night to sleep in the only place where the sheriff couldn't let the lynch mob in. And this brings us back to the image of that sheriff on the train platform that we began with. Now, what you need to understand is that what happened in Mound Bayou wasn't magic. It wasn't a utopia where everyone got along perfectly. It was a real place with real issues, but it was a proof of concept. It proved that poverty and chaos that we saw in other places wasn't natural. It was engineered. And when you remove the artificial weight of white supremacy, and when you allow black people to own land and control the bank and police their own streets, we didn't just survive, we thrived. We built hospitals, banks with surplus capital. We built towns that were safe, clean, and more prosperous than the white towns that were attempting to destroy us. And Mound Bayou, it's still here today. It's smaller. The highway system bypassed it, and the economy changed, just like it did for a lot of small rural towns and for a lot of black businesses. But the most important thing about Mound Bayou isn't how big it is today, is that it never burned. Unlike Tulsa, unlike Rosewood, the mob never came from Mound Bayou. They couldn't. Infrastructure was too strong. Ownership was too absolute. They had built a wall of deeds and dollars that hate couldn't climb over. So the next time that someone talks about trauma porn and that it's just an endless cycle of us building and destroying, you can tell them about the black town that was built in the swamp. Tell them about the sheriff who arrested a white man. Tell them about the bank who fought a credit freeze and won. And tell them that we didn't just survive the system. When we wanted to, we built a better one. Thank you. I'm your host, Country Boy. This has been One Mic Black History. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this. OneMicHistory.com. I also have a Substack. I would love to see you there. I post articles every single week, and I post notes every single day. I'd like to thank all my day ones, my financial contributors. I love every single one of you. Without you, none of this could be possible. Peace.